Alright, so I wanted to talk about the changes to the Chieftain Ascendancy. Um, Honestly, when I saw the changes to it, I actually felt grief. I really don't like the new one. It sort of changed what to me was one of the very most interesting, more complex ascendancy choices in the game. Obviously, it's one that I built around a lot. To something that is really paint by numbers, really very basic, really very handholdy, in my opinion, in terms of what it wants you to do. The old Chieftain to me was so flexible with what you could do with it, and there's so many different things. It was the only one that had a damage taken as conversion, which is interesting. It was the only one that had a damage conversion inherent to it, which was also very interesting. Just sort of the more complex physical to fire conversion things. Not that, it's not like gigabrain complex or anything, but it was one of the more interesting ascendancies to me, and obviously it's something that I built around a lot. It had a lot of interesting conditional things to it, I thought. But anyway, I thought I would talk about the Chieftain Ascendancy because they'd sort of discussed changing it for a long time, and had sort of my own thoughts on what they should do with that. Hadn't really shared them. Maybe I ought to have. Not that I think that I, as a minute content creator, would have moved the needle, but I thought I'd put them out there now just to discuss what I liked so much about the old one and what I thought would be interesting, and what we actually got and where that leaves us. So I have made a lot of builds with the Chieftain, specifically for hardcore solo self-found in general. Far more than I uploaded to YouTube or anything. I mean, I've literally probably over 100 builds in Path of Building somewhere where I felt that Chieftain was the best ascendancy for it, or the most interesting one. And you could do a lot of different things with it. But I'm going to go through each of the nodes on the old one and just sort of talk about what the identity of the old one was and what I thought was cool. So the first two I'll go through the totem nodes, and I really liked that these were in the game. So one is Tukohama, War's Herald, and the other is Arohongui, Moon's Presence. And why I thought this was important for them to be in the game is it was a different totem identity to the Hierophant, which is sort of the main totem thing. But Chieftain had this other identity, which is really cool. It was the physical totems, it was the Ancestor Totems, that is. And it had stuff that was sort of specific to him. It was the life-based, it was in some cases, still had some of the fire elements of it that take the increased fire and physical and fire damage, enemies that is, and then your totems are immune to fire damage, which I thought was a cool thing, and I actually built a lot of stuff specifically with Brutus Lead Sprinkler using these two. The 100% increased activation range was very good on War's Herald, and it really was a sort of unique playstyle that I personally enjoyed and thought was a cool part of, and logical part of his identity. Then the other nodes, I'm just going to go through them all. We're not going to see them again. So there was Valako, Storm's Embrace, which was this conditional damage boost with the endurance charges that was just worked with any build, provided you could lose endurance charges. So that was sort of the generic damage one that Chieftain had. There's Tasalio, which I think was one of, if not, in my opinion, basically the best node in terms of hardcore for staying alive. Getting 100% on fire resistance made getting your resistances so easy. That also had a lot of synergy with the strength stacking, because when you're strength stacking, that's one suffix, you don't have any for your gear. So here, the plus 100 fire resistance really made it much easier to achieve your resistance caps that you needed. Then obviously the very useful, the stat that I saw a lot, that I think other people are catching up to being really, really good, is physical damage taken as for defense. And then you have the increased sleep cover rate if you've taken fire damage unaffected by night. Anyway, just very, I don't know, one of the iconic nodes, I think. One of the things that I liked about Chieftain is that I thought it was good all the time, but one of the cool things about it was that higher end, deeper into the game, you could have achievable things. Like one of the things I really like to do in permanent leagues was build a Chieftain that had 100% of physical damage taken to something else, taking the Transcendence keystone off of the historical Timeless Jewel, and then using the armor to protect against an can't speak elemental damage, and then taking chaos inoculation, so you're immune to chaos, and it was just a ridiculously tanky character, and that was sort of a cool like end game persona that Chieftain had that no one else could really do, or at least not without, you know, like synthesized gear and just sort of ridiculous things. But it was like a real achievable goal that you could do, and honestly not even in a permanent league, just in a normal league, if you play it enough, that was a very achievable thing. It was kind of a cool thing that it could do that I really enjoyed. With the new Chieftain, I think it will actually be very, in some ways, very strong early on, and then it's going to have like no identity in the end game, basically, because the one thing that's really good about it is easily getting the 90% all res. Well, everyone can do that with melding of the flesh once you have enough investment. So I think it sort of lost its end game identity, part of which was provided by Tasalio. But anyway, then the other nodes, of course, also very iconic to my mind. The Ngamahu Flames Advance, 50% of damage taken or converted to fire, and then the extra physical damage is fire, which is nice that it was alternating, even though some people don't like the alternating buffs, because when you're making really big ignites, it's very useful, because you can see just how big of an ignite you could create during that. So it was actually more of a damage boost than if it was just constant but spread out. And then the Hinekora does Fury, very good for the Fire Leech. Nice to have the Ash, that sort of quality of life. You can usually get Ash on anything with the Infernal Cry, but has its function. And then the 10% increased strength for strength stackers, so very good in that way as well. And then we have Ramako, Sun's Light, another sort of generic damage one if you're doing fire, but a very solid node. I felt like it had its place. We've sort of discussed all of the ones now that I think had... Really, I honestly think you could have kept all of this exactly as is, and it would have continued to be a lovely ascendancy. The one node that I thought was stupid was the Tawho's Forest Strength, which is trigger Tau is chosen whenever you attack with a non-vol slam skill near an enemy. Nobody uses this. Literally nobody uses this. Slam skills don't use this. Seriously, look at people that build slams. I realize it's been a long time since someone did that, but even then they had it figured out. This does not provide enough damage for it to be worth taking. It's not affected by war cries. It's not affected by most damage increasing things that you would want it to be affected by. This is just not worth taking, even on a dedicated slam thing. Even on a dedicated slam thing where you're not wanting to slam so often that the cooldown would be an issue, it still wasn't taken. So all of these nodes, I think, were cool. They had an identity, and then there's this node which was worthless, that needed a significant buff to be worthwhile. And we switched to the new one, and the only node that they kept from the old Chieftain is Tawho, the one that no one uses, the one that, unless they include a significant buff in the patch notes, no one is going to continue to use. And they've gotten rid of everything else and sort of destroyed the identity. We have yet another stupid small percent chance to explode, dealing life as fire damage. Why? Was someone calling for this? Do we like tiny percent chances to explode as a community? I just don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, having this gone dumpsters a ton of builds, at least from my perspective. But now, I mean, we'll talk about the new one. You can assume that my wave of conviction on Chieftain is relatively dead. I mean, it will still work, but it's not going to have nearly what it did. Anything else that you followed with me on Chieftain, pretty much dead. Wouldn't consider using it. The one thing that they are hand-holding, forcing you to do on the new one is play Righteous Fire. It's going to be very strong for Righteous Fire. I think Righteous Fire is probably the most boring skill in the game, but you can build a really strong one on Chieftain now, because they have this node. Let me make sure I can find it. Yeah, nearby enemies have no fire resistance against damage over time while you are stationary. It's very strong. It's very strong for, only only Righteous Fire, really. Can't think of anything else you're going to be doing with it, unless you guys know another really strong damage over time besides, Fire Trap, Righteous Fire. And then the other node that's very, very strong for that, let me find it. Modifiers, nope, that's not it. sorry, Valako Storm's Embrace now gives modifiers to maximum fire resistance, also apply to maximum cold lightning. Obviously, you're going to be looking to cap fire resistance for Righteous Fire, so that's great. Now you have 90% all res. It's a very good defensive node. It's very strong. It's very basic. It just tells you what it does. Awesome. You have Tasalio, which still makes fire resistance or resistances in general a little bit easier to do. You just have to anything you do on fire, 50% to cold and lightning. Okay, great. It's still unaffected by ignite, which I mean, I'm glad they kept it, but it's still a gutted node compared to what it used to be. And some of these nodes are just, they're worthless. I can't imagine anyone taking Arohongui Moon's Presence, recoup 10% of damage by your enemies' life, totems regenerate 1 life per second, per 4 of your life recovery. What? It's even, if anything, those numbers should be reversed, right? They should get more for it to be in any way possibly relevant. But anyway, no one's looking for totem regeneration anyway. And totems taunt enemies around them for 4 seconds and summon. I mean, okay. There's a mastery that does 1 second. Is the extra 3 seconds that useful? I don't see this having a purpose to anyone. Ngamahu Flames Advanced. Non-unique tools cause increases and reductions other types in a large radius to be transformed to apply to fire damage. It's kind of cool. I like this node. If they had just added this node and gotten rid of the Tawhoas, that'd be cool. Obviously, it wouldn't just be added. They've taken the name off the old node. But if they had just added a new node that did that, that would be a really cool node. I think that's an interesting mechanic, and I think it fits the personality of Chieftain. Well done on that node. Would have been cool if you just gave us that. Tawho is still worthless. Tukohama Warso, that's cool. I don't mind them adding a bit of a slam identity to Chieftain, I suppose. I think to me it would maybe make more sense on a Berserker, but whatever. I don't object. I guess technically Chieftain has been the slam identity since it had Tawhoa, even though no one used it. But it's cool. I mean, we've never really had a node, at least to my recollection, that made things supported by leveled gems. That's interesting, and it's definitely going to be something that people use for sure. I definitely can see a slam skill, slam build using this. Now, slam builds aren't particularly good right now, but you know, it's both. Things change. At some point, slam builds will probably be good again, and then that node will be very useful. I already discussed Ramako. Hinekora, yeah, I discussed that as well. So this is the new Chieftain. It'll be good for a slam build, but slam builds aren't good, but that can change. It'll be really, really good for Righteous Fire as a league starter. It won't be good long-term for Righteous Fire, really. I mean, it will be okay. You're always going to have the Ramako Sun's Light. But when you factor in that on the high end, you're probably putting multiple curses and Wave of Conviction on something to reduce its resistance. Ramako doesn't really do that much. It does, but it's not insane. When you consider there's not a single other damage modifying its ascendancy node, I think Chieftain will probably still end up being weaker than, say, Elementalist, even for Righteous Fire, at a higher end of investment. But anyway, that's the Chieftain change, and as you can probably tell from my tone, I'm pretty frustrated by it. I don't like it. I don't think it fits the identity. I think it adds a couple of worthless nodes and gets rid of a couple of really cool ones, and keeps, you know, the most pointless node on the tree. So rest in peace, Chieftain. Yeah, I'll talk to you in the next one. You can let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe you guys have some cool ideas for it, but I'm not seeing anything in this new ascendancy that is interesting to me other than a very strong Righteous Fire build. I guess so.